Hi everyone, meteorologist Ed Valley here, taking a look at South America, and we're looking first here at precipitation over the last 7 days down in Argentina. Why are we showing this? Well, we've been talking about how it's going to be dry down in Argentina, and I've been chatting with folks over the last week or so, and everybody's saying, well, these patterns start dry and they've been coming in a little bit wetter as they get a little closer in Argentina. Is that true? Well, yes, it is so far. That's the key so far. The pattern here is definitely one that, while still not terrible, it's trending in a worse direction over time here. But up until now, including this past weekend, we saw quite good rainfall, if we're being honest, across a majority of Argentine croplands. And that is important to note, regardless of what we see in the future, right? Because I think half of my job is verification. It's verifying how these rains perform and how that compares to the modeling and whatnot. So you notice up in Brazil a similar story. Quite a good coverage of rainfall here. You can see, though, the yellows and the greens, those are areas that saw less than 1 inch of rain. So there are places that have missed out, but the coverage generally continues to be pretty good. Now, looking at the last 30 days, you can see even more so. Argentina, outside of parts of eastern Buenos Aires into Corrientes, a lot of Argentina has done quite well in the rainfall department, and you can see just the amounts here of 75 to almost 200 millimeters of rain. Just keeping in mind that prime Argentine production is in northern Buenos Aires up into central Cordoba, basically right in here. Pretty good rains across that area. Now, last 2 weeks, you can see it's been centered central and east in Argentina. The further west you go, obviously less production there anyway, but you notice the last 2 weeks in particular have been quite friendly. And you notice up in Brazil here over the last 2 weeks, there are areas of southern Brazil that are drier than normal. Pretty typical to see convection show areas that are below and other areas close by that are above. But when you look at this from a broader perspective, last 30 days, you can see we have been drier than normal in southern Brazil. Now, we've gotten a few MJO pulses that have allowed for some precipitation, heavy at times in parts of Argentina. So compared to a typical La Nina, this is a little bit better in parts of Argentina, but it is still drier than normal in parts of southern Brazil. Now, the other thing to note, the frequency of these rains have been spread out. Again, it's been drier than normal, but we've seen kind of we've approached a threshold where it's like, okay, well, we haven't seen rain in 10 or 12 days. All of a sudden, boom, you get some in parts of southern Brazil. So while the maps are important, it's also important to note timing matters. You can have a generally dry regime, but you get well-timed rain, and that lessens the impact, right? So it's still quite early. We're not close to reproductive stages yet. It's still only late November, but it is important to keep track of this stuff. And speaking of keeping track, we got to keep track of La Nina, right? And you see here, I have a graph here. This is a ensemble forecast from the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia. I've used this quite often. It's very, very, very good. And you notice here, the probability of La Nina is very high right now, and it's very high in January. You see that 80, 90%. But look at how that trends as we head into February and March. Very quickly moving down to only a 6% chance that La Nina is lingering into April of 2022. Not a good chance of El Nino by any stretch, but it's a neutral look that is favored here as we head into North American spring, South American fall, and that will likely have an impact on South American weather. Again, a lot of uncertainty you see as we head into, let's say, March. We have members of our ensemble that range from about negative 1.2 degrees Celsius to as much as plus 0.4 Celsius. So that's almost a degree and a half Celsius spread in the Nino region. That all that says is we got a lot of uncertainty ahead of us. And, through January, I think it's quite probable that we keep these La Nina conditions around. But beyond that, that's when we need to reevaluate, which we will, of course, do as we move forward. So just wanted to give you a look here at the next 10 days of weather, give or take. And the key here is through this week, most of Argentina, most of Brazil outside of a stray storm here Wednesday will be dry. So you look at these amounts through Friday, and you see it's, part of southwestern Argentina could see some precipitation, but a lot of Argentina and southern Brazil, including Paraná, parts of Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, all dry. over the next 4 or 5 days. Now, as we get into the weekend, you'll notice some additional showers and storms possible in Argentina. They don't look all that impressive, but we will at least see clusters of storms this weekend. And when you add those rains in, you notice the amounts at least become a little bit better, but still quite a few folks in Argentina and southern Brazil probably won't see any rain here through the weekend. And as you proceed into next week, you can see if you miss that, there's a decent shot that you go through most of next week with no rain. So we are starting to really see some of this drier risk show up and roll forward in the models here for South America and Argentina and southern Brazil specifically. Now, if you look at the European, you notice the same type of deal, right? You notice through next Wednesday, if you don't get rain over the weekend, you're not going to see it. It doesn't look like here. So Brazil, central Brazil continues to do quite well. But again, it's southern Brazil into Argentina that will be problematic here moving forward. And when you look at our forecast here into the 8 to 14 day, you notice the European still quite dry. The GFS, even the GFS is on the drier side here in Argentina and southern Brazil. And then our Canadian is wetter, but it has this wetter bias. So it's tough to really use the Canadian with any sort of confidence. Now, seeing this European this dry is concerning, of course. Now, zooming in, you can see the GFS, or excuse me, the European is dry in Mato Grosso do Sul, Paraná, down into parts of Rio Grande do Sul, whereas the GFS is certainly a lot better in Mato Grosso do Sul and Paraná. So there's some extent of how far north does this dryness extend into southern Brazil? That's another question we got to answer. Now, on the flip side, one thing to keep in mind here are temperatures. They're really not that hot here in Argentina. A little bit of a few areas might be slightly above normal through the middle of the month, but not a lot of heat is in the offering here for a lot of Argentina. Now, looking at our kind of our forecast here moving forward, there's still a lot of concern here. The 16 to 30 we put out on Friday still leans a little warmer and drier than normal in a lot of this part of the world, southern Brazil down into Argentina. That's going to be the focal point right into the January timeframe. As we just discussed, that La Nina does stick around. Now, I do briefly want to discuss the MJO. And I say that because you notice here, see how this is basically the last month or so, this black line. We've been in what we call the circle of death, meaning all it means is that the MJO pulse has been weak and really hasn't been influencing things too much. But look at what's happening here into December. We're going from 5 into 6 and 7. It's a dry look in 6 in parts of Argentina. Some parts of southeast Argentina might see some rain, but it's a drier look overall. And then as you get into phase 7, it's still drier in central Argentina, though a little better in parts of southern Brazil and eastern Argentina. So to me, it makes me question whether or not a drier solution like this European ensemble would be in southern Brazil. Why do I say that? Well, again, if MJO goes into phase 6 and 7, a lot of the research favors a wetter risk in Brazil, right? So just something to keep in mind. These models aren't perfect. That's why, folks like myself and our company have jobs, right? So, we're going to have to watch this moving forward, but generally the further south you go, the drier we're going to be. And that's where the risk is going to lie here through the middle and even the end of December. So much more coming your way this week. If you have questions, let us know, and we'll talk to you again in video form next Monday.